Hello, everyone, and welcome to Phoenix Gaming. I am your host, Nick Henning, and we are here today to actually just have a conversation about winning attitude, about sportsmanship, particularly in the world of board gaming. I am not a coach or anything like that. Outside of that world, we will touch a little bit on sportsmanship in other games and how it kind of pertains, or actually more accurately, I think doesn't pertain to board gaming. The timing of this is supposed to be synced up, in 2 weeks for me at this moment. I'll be playing Great Western Trail at World Series of Board Gaming. So if you're attending that event, hopefully this can help provide you with some perspective. If not, I think that this sort of idea could be helpful maybe in any other kind of competitive endeavor you're going into. So happy to have a conversation about it. Feel free to, of course, drop any comments that you have, perspectives that you have that have helped you sort of approach competitive scenes, particularly in this world of board gaming. But before we go into that, before I talk about kind of like what I think like winner's attitude is and what you can take that can like really just bolster the like small little edges of sort of that like can-do attitude that will potentially put you sort of over the top in a kind of competition where you're looking to get it any sort of little edge you can. But we need to start off by talking about sportsmanship in board gaming in particular. I think that different people have different perspectives of what sportsmanship means, or definitions maybe on what sportsmanship means. And I think it does mean different things in different contexts. Most of the time we think about this, right? Players that shake hands at the end of a game, particularly like a sporting events game, and the ability to essentially put it all on the field and then walk away at the end of the day without making it personal, right? This is something that is more prevalent in certain sports than others. This concept of like being able to like, maybe even if you are angry, like going through and doing that like end of the game handshake is like demonstrating what sportsmanship is. And it's really interesting because at the end of the day, like we do have emotions, we do have ways that we're going to react or feel in certain instances. I think that a part of it is that it's like not personal. Like I'm upset that we lost this game, or maybe I'm upset even that where does this cross over where it's like I'm upset that you guys use these certain tactics. There was this story going around this week about sort of this like baseball, someone getting thrown out of a game because essentially like one team had essentially aggressed against another team, and then when they like counter aggressed, the umpire decided to like throw them out of the game. And so there's this like complication of like we are in these situations where people have these opportunities to be very upset with each other. And I think in a lot of ways we define sportsmanship as like, hey, this is a reasonable context for you to be upset with one another, but actually it isn't really about the other person. And so the ability to make that not personal and the ability to at the end of the day walk away and say that it's okay is kind of an aspect of what sportsmanship is. I think that in board gaming, the concept of sportsmanship is maybe it could be a smidge higher than that. I'm not going to say that we execute that perfectly. I'm not going to say that I execute that perfectly. I used to be a really, really bad sportsman, and I'm still working on getting better at this aspect of myself, my personality. But I think that in board gaming, bringing everything to the table, like playing with sort of like maybe dirty or underhanded tactics or perspectives or, bold-faced lying to people about what you're going to do. It's okay for some game groups, but it's not for others. And because, we don't have essentially like a league that sort of determines what those rules are, and we don't have a greater social norm culture that's like observing us in these events that's putting pressure on it. It ends up being that people essentially have to define sportsmanship at their own tables. When you're going to a competitive event, though, there aren't going to be these sorts of structures in place. They're not going to necessarily play like how your home group does. And people are going to be miffed or piss you off in the way that they approach playing a certain game. That concept of like, is table talk valid? Is interacting with one another like a part of the game? What if I try to trick you in the course of the game? What if I try to cajole you into making a play that, yeah, maybe it's better for you, but it's also kind of better for me, and I'd certainly rather you did that than help player 3 over here. Does that fall under the realm of fair play or not fair play? And it starts to get really dicey about whether we think that these things are appropriate or not. And so I do think that it's important to acknowledge that we don't have big social norms around board gaming and rules for board gaming like we might in something like soccer or chess or poker, because these games are huge. They have giant communities where we are investigating over time and having these conversations about, well, we want this game to be a little bit different. But let's be honest with ourselves. Is the way that we play Splendor going to be the same way that we play Root or Great Western Trail or any of these other board games? They all have different sort of social structures in them. And, even those certain games these days will say things in them like, hey, all deal making is on the table. Well, other games don't necessarily say that deal making is off the table. I'm going to give an example actually from WSBG last year, something that I executed in a game that I don't think anybody thought was dirty, but it made me think about it in the aftermath of the event. I was playing a game of Arc Nova, and a player was very clearly going to end the game on their next turn. If they ended the game, I knew for a fact that I was host. That was definitely going to happen. They're going to end the game no matter what. If they ended the game and I didn't have a break, I knew that I was host, but I couldn't trigger the break on my turn. What I needed was for player 3, the one after me, to also trigger the break on their turn. And so I asked them at the table, if I do this, putting us in this position to trigger the break, are you interested in then triggering the break so that we can get money so that when he ends the game, both of us can play animals in the aftermath of that? And she thought about it for a second, and it legitimately was a better position for the both of us to be in, but it required us to collude to make this happen. Is that against social rules or is it not against social rules? I'm not really sure. No one was upset about it at the end of the day, but it is something that is a situation that can absolutely come up in these sorts of competitive games. We are playing a multiplayer situation. And so just having an idea of how you want to conduct yourselves and acknowledging that not everybody is going to follow the same norms, is going to be comfortable with the same norms, is going to be something that you're going to have to grapple with in, I think, going to a social event like this one. I said earlier in this rant that I'm going on that I think a big part of what I'm talking about in board gaming that I think could be different from these other sorts of events is the idea of actually just being pleasant. I think even if you are being sneaky and underhanded, we don't value players being pleasant in sports games. We actually want them to aggress on each other. The entire NBA basically is off of the drama between these players. And we love it when they're goose stepping around. Maybe they get in trouble here and there, but for the most part, we actually kind of celebrate this sort of attitude in players. If you are being an arrogant snot in the board gaming world, it is not going to last for long. People are not going to tolerate that. The concept of an arrogant winner in board gaming, I think doesn't go very far. It might go specifically in your home game group, but I think that when you start going to these competitive events, it isn't going to happen that way. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that sports are not just consumed by the players of the game, right? Board gaming is almost entirely consumed by the players of the game. Yeah, of course, there are a few fans on this channel who are not active board game consumers that are maybe there in the wings, but they're not a big part of the community. They're not the ones who are kind of piping up and having strong opinions about how a lot of these things are going to be executed. It really is going to be on us as the players. In the sports world, you have all of these players that have a surrounding community. A lot of people who are really engaged and have strong opinions about how they're going to act about things. Some people are going to like that drama. That's why we see that kind of thing in maybe the NBA world. I have a friend who says his favorite part about the NBA is the beefs that people have with each other. It is the part about the game that makes it most interesting for him, that meta world around the game itself, and the fact that they all have these stories with each other, not the actual individual games that are getting played with one another, which is fascinating, right? And so you then see players who are rewarded for having these really big attitudes, right? That is something that I think in board gaming is going to backfire pretty hard. We think about the same thing and we say, oh, maybe it's just because it's a very physical game, but this is true in poker, right? Phil Hellmuth is not a pleasant man. At least he's not a pleasant man on camera, on screen when he's doing this. And like maybe he's specifically doing these things to like put his opponent on tilt or whatever. I have no idea what this man is like in real life. And I think that I say that on purpose because I do think that people who are playing games at these levels, professional levels, are probably, it's genuine to their persona, but like you can't just like put on a whole personality that is past your persona, but like it's tied, right? They're really, really tied to each other. And I do think that there's an acknowledgement that there's essentially when a player is rewarded for these kinds of behaviors, it's going to keep on happening. I think in board gaming world, that isn't going to happen. A big part of that also is not just the fans that I'm talking about, the other people that are involved in the community, but also money, right? Like when you are coming and playing board games, what's on the table is significantly less than anything we're talking about here. The WSBG event that comes up in a couple of weeks, top prize is $25,000. That is unheard of in the board gaming world. It is the first event, certainly of its kind, and that is a drop in the bucket compared to what anything else in the competitive world, any of the sports, poker, Magic the Gathering. In fact, let's talk a little bit about Magic the Gathering. Okay, I'm just gonna call it Magic because that's what you're supposed to call it when you play. I played a lot of Magic in my lifetime, and I played a fair amount of competitive Magic as well. I never got into the constructed scene. I'm strictly a sealed and draft player, and so I never really got big in the world or anything like that. Never dedicated a ton of time, but definitely played enough to be at some events. Never went to the Pro Tour, but played at like Grand Prix events here and there. If you know what any of that means, great. If not, it just means that it's like I could choose to play those events without necessarily qualifying. But certainly a mixture of professional and non-professional players were at these events. I'm going to tell a couple stories about my time in playing Magic. And I also want to start off by saying that I think that Magic has a pretty bad reputation, or at least it did have a pretty bad reputation of being a relatively toxic community. And I think it's valid. I think it's a valid concern that that was the case in the competitive scene for quite a long time. I don't really know what it's like these days, so maybe they've kind of cleaned up a little bit in the community and what it's like, but there were definitely games and opponents that were unpleasant to play with. At my first big Grand Prix, which was in Toronto, I flew there with a friend of mine. We stayed at an Airbnb. It was really exciting. I had just a killer deck, and I was crushing it. In fact, on the very first day of play, I went 10 games undefeated. In the 6th game of that day, I played against a professional player. I think he was like semi-professional is what you'd call him. It wasn't what he did all the time, but he was definitely well known in the community. I recognized him the moment he sat down at the table. We played a game, went to 3 matches, really, really insane. Actually, like in retrospect, super good games of Magic. There was this like really key point at the end of the 3rd game where I played this like monstrous bomb that could win the game for me, turn things around. But my opponent had me on such the back foot that I essentially had to suicide this unit to block one of his units. And there was this very complicated sequence of events that took place in this blocking sequence that took a moment to figure out. It was not a pleasant game. At one point he started like kind of like complaining about how long I was taking on my turns, although I know for a fact that he was taking significantly longer on his turns than I was. We had a judge come over at one point, and this was a little bit weird and uncomfortable because like he's a known quantity, I'm not a known quantity, and I definitely felt like the judge was pressuring me more than pressuring this other player. At the end of the day, though, I was not too concerned. Like I've been in competitive gaming situations before, so this didn't throw me off, but I think it would throw a certain player off easily. And I ended up actually winning the game. Now, that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that when the game ends, my opponent snaps the top card of his deck, looks at it, slams it on the table in frustration, does it again for the next 3 cards, slams them down, and then sticks his hand out to shake my hand. The classic, like, it's the end of the game, good game, shake hands at the end of the game. That is, in the sports sense, like what sportsmanship is. But I remember walking away from that table not feeling terribly good about that interaction. The idea of sort of having this like moment of like, it's not explosive because it's not that dramatic, but like, let's call it explosive frustration. And then saying, oh, okay, good game anyway. it didn't feel great. It did not, I wasn't terribly satisfied in that moment. I felt relieved that I won this like pretty intense game. I felt really good about keeping that up. But that personal interaction, I do not have a high opinion of this player. And that will never change, right? Like this, but that's like, he did the sportsmanship thing. He stuck his hand out. But I was not impressed by this particular exchange. I think there are some people who are watching this video who are like, hey, like, you know, he was upset. Like, of course you're allowed to be upset. And you are. And I think that there is something a little bit curious or odd about maybe my perspective on when you're allowed to like show your upsetness or not. I think that it has something to do with like how one shows their upsetness. And I haven't quite really teased all of that out for myself yet. But I do think that there is a way that you can conduct yourself on a table physically or even frankly, like emotionally. Like you can be upset, but moving in such a way that I think socially makes other players uncomfortable is a tactic. Like whether it's intentional or not, it is a tactic. I don't think it's a tactic that people employ like, oh, I'm going to like accomplish this and it's going to change the course of the game. It's a social tactic that's employed. And I do think that we are like sort of responsible for being aware of the way that we are acting and like using our bodies around other folks and times. Magic is a weird game because it is a specifically one-on-one environment. You are trying to just beat the other player. And I think that's something that's different about board gaming that I'm going to come back to in just a minute. And there is something about that one versus oneness that I think engages a little bit more of what I will call the bile, that bad feeling that comes up in you that you're like, I want to win this. I'm going to like get this. And you're beating me, and it strictly feels bad. You know, at the end of the day, when I like count up points and you beat me in the Euro games, you can have a little bit more of like, I tried my best, or it was a good game, I played it. When you're playing one-on-one, it tends to feel a little bit more beat down. I think that fighting games tend to really draw up this kind of feeling in people. Play any or like watch like an amateur like Smash Brothers 1v1 tournament versus like people just playing Smash Brothers at their house. I think that like there's something about the direct me versus you nature of things that puts people in a very different place. My last Magic story is the last event that I went to. It had been a couple years since I'd really played Magic seriously. And I went to this event that I ended up actually strangely doing one of the best I'd ever done at a Grand Prix. But this story takes place in round 8. And this is the part of the tournament where on the first day, people get really tense because you can only have 2 losses and advance to the next day. It's a really uncomfortable place to be in. I think actually at this point I might have been undefeated or maybe 1 loss or something like that. It was in a really good spot, but it was not a good enough spot that losing round 8 makes you very comfortable. You're really trying to win out. I played against this opponent and he just seemed like he was a little bit worse than me, but he kept drawing all these like great cards out the top of his deck and he was winning. The bile was coming up in me for sure. I wasn't feeling great about this game. I was using my body in a way that I think is not necessarily nice, kind of grumpy. At the end of the game, I had this thought about I was not pleased with the way that I had conducted myself. I knew that I was being kind of shitty. And my opponent at the end, I mean, I did the thing. At the end of the game, I didn't slam cards on the board or anything. I stuck my hand out, said good game, signed the slip, passed it to him. And he stops me and says, hey man, I just wanted to stop and say thank you. You were the most pleasant opponent I played with today. And that floored me because I was not pleased with how I was acting. And so that means that this person had just gone through a day of people being even pissier, even grumpier. I knew that I was not being my best. I knew that I was kind of like being curt in the way that we were doing our exchanges and everything like that. But that meant that other people that were playing this game were like actively saying awful stuff or like huffing or like storming off at the end of the game or whatever it was that happened to him. That was crazy to me. It was the last moment that I played at a competitive Magic event. It's a long time. I would maybe go back again, but only if I've like heard that the community has changed since then. I think it's really a shame that that's the way things have gone. I'm not here to dunk on board game or Magic. I'm here to talk about board gaming, right? So let's talk about multiplayerness and why multiplayerness, I think, makes things very different in the board gaming world, and actually why I think you get rewarded for being a better sportsman, and for more specifically what I'm talking about here, being a pleasant opponent. Board gaming has a memory. It's a really small world. You're going to play against a lot of the same players time and time again. And that perspective that people have of you carries from game to game. There's an event that I go to, the WBC event, that there's a player who like has a reputation of being a negative player. And I've played with this player. They, in the past, were pretty miserable to play with. People don't like to play against this person, and when they do, they expect a certain kind of like series of lines going to happen in the game. If they're thinking to themselves, who am I going to defend against, who am I going to aggress against, this person comes to the top of people's minds almost immediately, almost every time. The really sad thing is that actually nowadays this person is not really like that anymore. They've definitely grown up and matured, but people have a long memory, right? And they will change over time, but it takes a long time to dislodge a reputation. And so I do think that it is important for you to think about what you want your reputation to be in these kinds of events. I had an instance at WSBG last year where I felt that an opponent went back on an explicit agreement that we had made in the game. That's fine. That's their prerogative. And I'm not talking about an agreement that we made in the context of the game. I'm talking an agreement about how we meta decided we were going to play the game. What that means is that the next time I play that opponent, I'm going to hold them to every single rule that there is in the game. Yeah, maybe that's petty, but frankly, to me, that is only fair. That is something that we have as a community, as a tool to sort of essentially make people agree to these sort of like terms. Another WSBG story, 2 years ago when I played in the Dominant Species Marine tournament, at the end of the game, a player had a choice. They were out of the game and they could either hit someone else or hit me. And they chose to hit, it's like it would have taken a while, I think, to identify who the correct person to hit was. But there was one player that had hurt them at the beginning of the game. So who do you think they went after? Obviously, this like sense of justice, right? This like retribution is a component that it takes place within the context of a game, but it extends outside of the context of the game. And we could say that like good players aren't going to remember, aren't going to do that from game to game, but you can't count on every player in the field to do that. And you can't count on every good player to do that. And in fact, I personally have found that making a very clear line in the sand is actually a really important tool in engaging socially in these games. So I'll tell a story from WBC this year. I played a game of Evolution, which is a game where you can target certain players. I had a really rough start in this game, and an opponent attacked me, no complaints, and then they went to attack me again. I said, if you execute the second attack on me, I am going to come back and kill your guys. Like, there are other people to attack. I'm already knocked down. I'm already losing. If you come for me, I'm going to remember it. He was like, I don't know if you're actually that kind of player. And we proceeded to play through the game, and I went through on my promise. I constructed a way that I could hurt this other player and did that. I am not doing that out of pettiness. I'm doing that out of staking a reputation, right? That is, I wasn't unpleasant about this interaction. It was not like it's like not a threat of promise kind of thing. And I didn't say it with any bile inside of me. I just said it as like, this is the line that I'm going to take if you're putting me in this position. And that's because I know that the game has a memory. And I also want this player to understand anytime they play a game with me in the future that like we have memories from game to game. So now I know he's going to like think in a certain way, and he knows I'm going to think in a certain way throughout the game. Board games are social. They like require us to understand that. And this like story that I'm telling right here, I realize is not really about sportsmanship. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. The point that I'm trying to make is that multiplayer games actually challenge the social structures that you're in. And I think acknowledging and understanding what that looks like without doing it in sort of like an intentionally petty or cruel way can make a really big difference. And, you know, at the end of the day, this player and I had a good rapport at the end of the game. We walked away having put everything on the field and walked away with good feelings about what had happened because we were both pretty honest and straightforward with each other about what had happened. No one was upset about what had happened in the game because everything he was doing was within the rules. At the time, yeah, I did feel like I was kind of getting punched down on, but also, let's be honest, I'm a pretty good board gamer. Pretty good board gamer. So when people choose to attack me, I don't take it too personally at this stage. I tend to be public enemy number one, and that's pretty fair for a handful of reasons. But it does mean that I also am not just going to take that. And having that dynamic amongst your personal crew people might already know that, but they're not going to know that in a social setting. But you will bump into them again some years in the future. All right, enough rambling about these like various stories. Let's talk about winning attitude. The first thing I want to talk about in addressing this is actually one of the best perspectives you can have in board gaming. The whole like Rainier Knizia, the objective is to like play to win. This isn't the perfect quote. It's like the objective is to like play to win, but it is not the winning that is important. It is the like having played to win or whatever. I don't remember exactly how he says it, but that's the basic concept, right? That you are always engaging with the game with this goal of taking victory, but winning does not like reflect any value on you. I think this is a really good perspective. Another really good perspective to have about board gaming in general is that like I am playing board games for fun, right? Again, if you're looking for something to be competitive and be at the top of things, maybe your like local softball league or whatever is a better place to do that. I do not think that board gaming is the best avenue if you're like, I am here to compete. In fact, go play Magic, right? Like that's a really good, like I think collectible card games are incredible for getting that like competitive urge out of you. There's a lot of wonderful like video game tournaments. Yes, competing in board games is fun. And of course I compete and I play to win. So like I'm not the great like quintessential example of that, but it's because I really love board games and I do also like competing, but the competing is secondary to the board games. I think if the competing was the top thing, this is not the correct hobby, in my opinion. There's just not enough space for it. And also, like, frankly, there's a lot of volatility that there isn't necessarily in some of these other kinds of formats that I think really benefits players that have, you know, those competitive perspectives. That being said, I do think that there is a mild flaw that I hear from people when they talk about these two philosophies and it comes to competing. And it starts with, I'm just here to play. And so it doesn't really matter if I'm going to win, or I don't really think I'm going to win. This kind of, what am I trying, like by extension at times, people take this, I'm just here for fun. And so therefore I don't think I can win. They don't say that part. It's in parentheses always, but you can hear it. I can hear it in people's voices. People do not believe that they have the stuff that it takes to like get to the top of a game. And yeah, if I was going to play a game of basketball with LeBron James, it's not going to be even remotely close. He is going to stuff me every single time. I can't, stand up to an like Ken Jennings in trivia or anything like that. I get that, right? Like those are pretty much nearly hopeless moments. Board gaming is not like that. Again, I'm going to sound a little arrogant here, but I'm one of the better board games that there are around. And I lose games all the time, constantly. It's kind of required. Board games tend to have a fair amount of volatility in them. The game itself might have card draw or dice or anything like that, but there's also the dynamics of what's going on with the players at the table. There's just way too many variables to account for. A game of poker has a ton of variability, but it's generally like really condensed to the deck. Like people know the percentages when you're experienced in the game. Like you pretty much know exactly like what the like your wild shots are and everything like that. And of course on television, then they end up showing the ones where it's like, oh, he started with ace ace and he started with king king. How often does that happen? Not often. That's why you play a gazillion hands of poker when you go to these kinds of tournaments. Board games are not a gazillion hands. We're gonna go play at this WSBG in 2 weeks, and you're gonna play 3 or 4 rounds, 3 or 4 consecutive games of winning. That leaves a lot of wiggle room for getting a little bit lucky or getting a little bit unlucky. The best player does not always win. I think one of the things that I find most fascinating about all my online conversations with folks is they want, in the like competitive board gaming world, is like they want things to be leagues, Swiss style things, right? Points, opportunities to play a lot of games, you know, right? The reason that like baseball series are like 7 games long is like we want the best team to win or whatever, right? So we're going to make them play a lot of games. But like playoffs are really exciting. There's a reason that people love March Madness. Single elimination is riveting and upsets are amazing and they happen all the time. And they're going to in board games as well. Over the course of 3 or 4 rounds, you absolutely have the opportunity to win the game. If you're a person who is watching this video, you've chosen to go to an event about competitive board gaming, you are very live to win that event. You gotta believe that you can do that. Now, this isn't just about like attitude. I think the biggest thing that people have when they don't like believe is they stop looking for lines. I see folks at the end of the game, they go through the motions. It's not like they like give up the game or start throwing points to the opponents or anything like that. But there's got to be a point in the game where you say to yourself, what is the opportunity that I have? What is the line that I have? Are there any escapes I have? Maybe I'm behind right now or I'm ahead. Are there any escapes you have? And just making sure that you're vigilant in asking yourself those questions throughout the course of the game is going to give you just a couple extra percentage points that I think makes a really big difference. That's actually why I think the believing thing matters most, is those percentage points that you're staying vigilant throughout the course of the game. And if there is one thing I actually am going to like tie all these ideas to, it is that concept of vigilance. Board gaming is a marathon. We spend more hours playing this game than most people do playing their other events, right? Soccer's on the field for 90 minutes. And like, we're impressed that the soccer players run the whole time, right? Like that is crazy, but it is relatively a sprint. The mental drain of playing 3 games in a row, each 2 hours, it starts to add up really, really, really quickly. You get tired. So that concept of being vigilant is super important. The only other game that I think is close to it is poker, right? And they play like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours all day long. Those players I think are a really good example of like, and talking to like a professional poker player is a great idea of like, how can I get some stamina? How can I get some resilience throughout the course of the day, throughout the course of the game? The advantage that poker players have though, is that anytime that they're folding for the round, they kind of just get to check out for a few minutes. I mean, you watch people playing in those like World Series of WSOPs and they're just there with like earbuds in, like chilling. Generally in a board game, you don't get to do that. We're responsible for making sure that each other are following the rules. You're constantly updating information that is happening throughout the game because new information is coming in, which is not usually the case with poker. So it's a lot more taxing, I think. I think it's one of the most taxing things that you can do over a long period of time. And of course, that's like me saying that because it's my hobby, but I do think it's true. Speaking of finding lines, you got to know what kind of tournament you're playing in. We're going to talk about the World Series of Board Gaming. There is no place but first place. You do not advance to the next round if you don't win. You do not win the ring if you don't win. Taking it from me, who got to 3 finals last year and didn't win a single one of them, you walk away with very, very little, except for maybe some reputation and some pride points, which are nice, for getting to the end but not getting all the way there. You have to be seeking out a path to victory. Now, when I play games at home, when I play games at WBC, when I play games in most other contexts, I'm trying to maximize my points. I'm trying to see what I can do to do the best. I want to see if I can like maybe beat my score from last game, even if I'm not going to win this game. You know, I definitely have those kinds of goals. When I'm playing at World Series of Board Gaming, there is no place but first place. And there are other situations in where I think that attitude of I only need to win this game and there's no other path are very important. I'm going to tell a story a couple of years ago from the WBC. So at the WBC, usually if you don't win a heat, you can't advance. I was playing in a specific heat game. I knew for a fact that I needed a win to advance. The second place was going to do nothing for me. There was one opponent who was very, very far ahead in this game. They'd had a bunch of deliveries and everything like that. It was pretty clear that the game was going to end on his next turn. And Turn and Taxis is one of these formats that everybody has the equal number of turns, but there's no extra turnaround. So I was like first player and he was third player or something like that. So if he ends the game on his turn, I'm toast. Like I should close my route I will definitely get second place, but I know for a fact that I can't get first place. I realize that the only way that I'm going to win this game is for my opponent to fumble and blow up their whole route. The odds of this happening are like so small, but it's possible. It is really the only way that I could win, because he would need to blow up his route. I would need my route to be longer so I can get these extra points for having done XYZ thing. And so I just passed the turn. It's a crazy thing to do. It's not good play, but it was the only kind of play that I could make and then end up winning the game. Of course, my opponent then closed their route on their turn. I was like in fourth place because of it. And I don't regret that play at all. I would not go back and change it. That was a context in which the only thing that mattered was winning. Whereas probably if I was playing at home, yeah, I probably would have closed my route and just taken the second place and been content with it. I think that having that perspective, having that understanding that like you are playing to try to win the game makes a really big difference as you're moving your way through. I want to talk about, let me read my notes. I want to talk actually about 2 WSBG games that I think are really helpful in understanding this concept, Earth and Wingspan. So in Wingspan, a really common strategy is fill up your bird egg row and then run the egg row all the way at the end of the game, right? In the first year of the finals of this game, they were playing with the power birds, and we had one player that had the Chihuahua Raven in the egg laying row, and another player that had the Killdeer in the egg laying row. And of course they ran away with it because the power birds are ridiculous in Wingspan. But there was another player at the table who played a normal good game laying things in the egg row. And I said, I thought that was a really bad strategy. The reason that I think that's a bad strategy is because you know that your egg row is worse than these other players. So you need to have some other avenue of attack. Just doing someone else's strategy but worse might be good, but it will never be good enough. Scoring 100 points in Wingspan when you know someone else is going to score 110 is not helpful. So understanding sort of the circumstances makes a big difference. I played a game of Wingspan where an opponent had a really strong start, and I played what I did in response is I played a bunch of those birds that like give everybody resources, and then all of a sudden the fact that that player had bonus resources didn't make as much of a difference because I was just making everybody richer. It ended up working out in that instance. It doesn't always, but I think that acknowledging that just doing someone else's plan but weaker is a big part of that. Earth is exactly susceptible to the same thing. You might be saying to yourself, I think one of the most fascinating things that I see people do in Earth Online, Earth is, if you don't know, is a game where you take one of 4 actions on your turn, and every player is going to follow that action. So you can plant, which is put cards in play. You can draw cards, grow, or whatever it's called, which is drawing cards. And then you can do soil for red, whatever that is, and then watering for blue. And both blue and red actions give you resources that give you like soil, which is money. And what I see in the game is people like red is the best way to get soil generally at the beginning of the game. And what I see in the game is someone starts off with a strong red engine. Other players try to also do a red engine. They take reds on their turns, but they end up just losing to the player with the better red engine. Of course you're going to. You're doing the same thing that they're doing, but worse. You might beat players 3 and 4, but you're never going to win that game. And so acknowledging the points where you are just sort of like sliding into something else, like making the choices that are just helping the other player who is already winning the most, not very helpful. So definitely thinking of those ways of, yeah, this is not necessarily the absolute best. And by absolute, I mean like in the terms of the mathematical, like the number is highest by doing this, but I need to think about what relatively is happening. And if there is a player that is winning the game, how can I relatively get a little edge over them, over someone else? And you might not be able to tell in some games, and that's fine. If you misread the board state, that's just learning. That's just experience. But if you know for a fact that like this player is winning the game and you just kind of draft behind them, it's not going to work out. Unless it's heat, in which case drafting definitely works out. Let's talk about the more obvious things. Precious life-giving water. If you watch any game of me at WSBG playing the finals, you see me get up to pee at least once a game. It's because I'm constantly drinking water, and you should too. This sort of is like a really boring hint, but it's really important. You are in these like horrible hotel rooms. Your throat's going to be all scratchy. You're going to get a splitting headache from the crazy lights that they put in there that are not the same lights that you have from this. If you're not drinking water, that headache is going to be worse. You've just been playing board games for like 8 hours straight. Drink some freaking water. This also extends into sort of other take care of yourself things. You should be eating food, right? You should be sleeping. And of course, we're in Vegas. We're here to have a good time. Have a good time. But you should find a way to keep yourself relatively on pace. I'm a night owl, so if I stay up until 1 o'clock, I'm going to be fine the next day. And I can force through waking up early. I'm not going to like force myself to go to bed. That's not going to be like natural for my patterns. And that's going to be the way that it is. I think the biggest example of things that like people will do as a mistake is they'll like be tired and then they'll drink coffee, but they're not coffee drinkers. And then you're just going to feel all messed up throughout the course of the day. If you're on medication, take your medication like normal, right? Like make sure that it's packed in advance. Like just do as many of the things that keep your like regular body state as close to your regular body state as possible. This isn't a terribly interesting section, I think, but it is super important. I do want to tell a story about a guy who is a ring winner from last year. I walked past him at one point. Hey, where are you headed? Like, I think we're about to head the round. He's like, well, I got 45 minutes, which is enough time for me to hit the gym, which is what he would normally be doing at home. And so he made sure that he hit the gym in between this block, which is what he does in between his work meetings. Makes total perfect sense. I mentioned earlier about kind of like winning attitude and what it is. I don't think that there is a specific thing that I could point to as attitude. Oh, I still got water on the screen. I don't think it matters if you necessarily are happy with yourself, no matter how you perform, or if you're a person who beats yourself up how you perform, or any of that stuff. I think that that's different for different people, and I don't really have the experience in life to tell you what I think works for these instances. I think that there are two things that matter, though. There should be a reason to try, just a reason why you care, why you're here to try and win. What is at stake for you? For me, it's bragging rights. That's what I come to this event for. Maybe you really care about the cash and like that might inform your decisions or whatever, but like having a sense of like what it is that you're trying to do, I think really helps. And then the second thing, and this is probably the more important of them, is figuring out a way to recover. Even at every event you're going to go to, I lose more games than I win. You are going to lose more games than you will win. By definition, you are trying to hit a hot streak. You can't hit a hot streak if you have a bad day and the next day you come back and you're still in a bad mood. I guess you can. People do. But I think it's a lot rarer. I think generally being of a good and healthy mindset tends to lead to more positive results than otherwise. And so I think having a way of recovering, being able to put aside your losses and leave it at that is a really big deal. So thinking about what that means for you is important. And then finally, I think there is one really important thing to acknowledge about what winning means at these events. You got to get really fucking lucky. It doesn't matter how good you are. Being lucky is very, very important in this process. Being good really helps. It does. But being lucky is even more important. Let's say that you are a really normal average player and you have a 25% chance to win any 4-player game that you sit down and play. In fact, we'll just say that you're not very good at 3-player games, so we're just going to say it's 25% chance no matter what. In order for you to win 4 games in a row, which is probably what WSBG looks like, you need to hit a 0.3%, a 3 in 1,000 chance to win the whole thing. Now that's possible. That's a whole lot less than hitting most of these lottery events, right? 3 in 1,000 is not horrible odds, but it is small odds, right? You have to get really lucky. It's not that you win 1 game. It's that you win 4 games. And the like statistics of this like really, really compounds on each other. Let's say that you are ridiculously good at games. You win 60% of the 4-player games you sit down to play. And we'll just say that, again, that applies if you're playing a 3-player game or a 2-player game as well. 60% of a 2-player game is maybe just like you're quite good. That's a win rate in Magic that I know most people would be really excited to have at serious competitive events. But it's like not insane, right? But a 60% win rate in a 3-player game and a 60% win rate in a 4-player game is bonkers. It's crazy, crazy high. And I'm not talking about the board game arena ridiculous like you have 100% win rate because I wanted to balance it between 2, 3, 4 players. I mean, genuinely a 60% win rate. If you have a 60% win rate, in order to win 4 games in a row, you only have a 13% chance to win the event. Okay. That's pretty good, all things told, but also I just described someone who is like God level at playing any of these board games. Anybody, including people who are really good, who gets to the top of one of these events, hit an absolute hot streak. This is not like baseball or football. The best teams there are oftentimes just the best teams, and even the best teams still are going to lose from time to time. There's a lot more variables that go into a board game, and I think that those things are just not controlled. Are there more variables that go into a board game than playing football? That's maybe not a fair comparison. There's just a lot of variables. Acknowledge that the randomness is super high for everybody at the table. And so acknowledging that even if you did the best things, you made all the best choices, you are not necessarily going to come out on top. Thanks for watching this video. I'd love to hear your comments on anything throughout the way. If I see you at WSBG, come and say hi to me. It makes my entire day when folks introduce themselves to me and tell me that they watched literally anything on this channel. I wish you the best of luck. I wish myself the best of luck. And yeah, be good to yourselves. Have a wonderful day, everybody.